So today we are really excited to host Professor Paul Liang from MIT. Professor Liang is an assistant professor at the MIT Media Lab and the Department of Electrical Engineering and Computer Science, where he lead the Multisensory Intelligence Research Group. He earned his PhD in machine learning from Carnegie Mellon University, where he also received a master's degree in machine learning and a bachelor degree in computer science and neural computation. During his PhD, he has been working with leading AI labs, including DeepMind, Facebook, Meta, NVIDIA, and Google. In summer 2024, he was a visiting researcher at the UC Berkeley's Simons Institute, contributing to the program on AI, psychology, and neuroscience. His contributions have already been recognized with honors such as the Siebel Scholars Award and multiple Best Paper Awards. Before we begin, I would like to give a quick highlight. The incoming AI for Materials, Energy, and Chemical Sciences Golden Research Conference, a new GRC meeting I'm co-chairing. We are very grateful for the special support of our sponsors, including PPG Industries and Meta, whose contribution help us to partially support invited speakers, discussion leaders, and early career scientists. Without further ado, Paul, the virtual podium is yours. Let me just stop sharing my slides.
Great. Thank you, Hong Liang, for the kind introduction and for the invitation. Thank you, everybody, for coming. So today I'll be giving a part tutorial, part research talk on multimodal AI. I saw the call that this was a webinar on AI and generally AI for science. And of course, so many applications in today's AI world are very multimodal in nature. So hopefully this will be a good introduction to the field, the latest methods, and also to the conceptual ways of thinking about multimodal so that people can apply them to their problems of interest. So naturally, a lot of multimodal AI is about modeling this world around us, this natural, physical, social, human world around us, which is very multimodal in nature. If you look at understanding people, for example, and understanding their health and well-being, you want to be able to understand what words they're speaking, their vocal expressions, their facial gestures, and body language, and all this comes about together to bring about true understanding of people and social interactions. If you want to build AI for health systems to better understand healthcare and well-being, you want to integrate various data modalities like X-ray images, histology images of specific cells that are suspicious under the microscope, medical sensors that are being used to collect longitudinal data from people in hospitals, and even nowadays using the wide array of wearable and mobile devices, which gives us more day-to-day information about our health and well-being. And of course, that's just the tip of the iceberg for so many more applications like understanding social networks, like understanding various physical phenomena. It requires the understanding and integration of different data modalities that each give different views of the problem. And for some motivating examples, as I've mentioned, healthcare is a big one that my group currently works on. Looking at physical health is all about understanding both visual and sensing modalities that are used to understand conditions of patients in the hospital. To understand a person's emotion, you have to really understand their various communicative modalities and also subtle modalities, how we use our smartphones, how we interact with people, where we go. Those are all big indicators of our emotional well-being. And we've been very successful at using this to analyze whether a person might have stress or depression or even people who might be suicidal. So using that to better convey that information to their psychiatrists and therapists. And finally, we've also done lots of work on social wellness, being able to understand verbal and vocal and visual expressions to understand how people interact and whether they are flourishing in these social interactions. A very big part of AI and science is, as I mentioned, understanding the physical world. And understanding this physical world involves various other digital modalities. Some of these are more sensor-based. So in robotic systems and autonomous systems, you often have this problem of requiring to understand both the force and the vision. So force is what the robot feels, whether this material is hard or soft. deformable or not deformable. And vision tells you the exact, size and shape, color, and more information about the material of the object. So our group is doing lots of work in combining vision and touch as the primary means of interacting with the world and developing autonomous systems that can interact with the world. Another project that I'm really excited about in my group that is also a multimodal nature is AI for smell. You look at smell, this is a completely new modality that is understudied by AI, but it can have great applications in detecting whether a food or beverage is good or gone bad. It can be used to detect whether the manufacturing pipeline is normal or something's wrong. It can be even used for health, right? Many kind of diseases can even be smelled because of hormones. So these are some early prototypes that we're using these sensors that you can bring about to different foods and beverages, such as a candy bar or a jar of peanut butter, and it can even detect the presence of peanuts just based on the smell of the substance. Of course, this smell is actually being captured by sensors that capture gases, volatile gases and compounds that are being released from these substances, and building AI for these time series data. And this particular case is very useful for detecting if a person might be allergic to some of these substances. The next generation of generative AI will also be very multimodal in nature. We are going beyond text-to-text systems to systems that can understand language and other digital modalities, and also generate text and generate more digital modalities. So we're seeing cool things like text to video. We're given a video, you can generate the right audio or music or soundtrack. And all of this can be used for, of course, content creation, for AI and creativity, but sometimes it's also very useful to generate synthetic data in a reliable way as for data augmentation. The next generation of digital agents, these autonomous agents that live on your computer, that operate in the world, are also going to be very multimodal because they have to understand not just language instructions, but actually grounded in virtual and digital and physical environments. So some of these examples of these autonomous agents for shopping, and also by extension, autonomous agents for scientific discovery, for science, for manufacturing, they all have to understand language and be grounded in these real-world platforms. So I'm just giving some examples here. These agents might have to be able to understand HTML, operating systems, databases, spreadsheets, PowerPoints, and even scientific environments, experimental environments. All these are different data modalities that have to be combined. So given that motivation, I'm sure most people agree that a lot of AI in the future will take in lots of multimodal inputs, combine them, and also learn representations. Today's outline will be in 3 parts. Right? In the first part, we'll quickly, briefly discuss what is multimodal AI, what are the nature of multimodal problems, when are modalities important, and when is multimodal useful. We'll then cover why is multimodal AI difficult, right? Of course, it's great. We must build multimodal systems. They're very powerful, but of course, they're very difficult to build. So we'll uncover specific challenges and also come up with a framework to allow you to identify what methods should be used to tackle these challenges. And finally, if time permits, I'll cover as much as I can what I feel is next for multimodal AI. What are the recent advances and next steps in this space? This is, of course, going to be a 50-minute talk, but if you're interested, we have this much longer survey paper called Foundations and Trends in Multimodal Machine Learning that covers all the latest advances, challenges, and recent papers. We've also given the longer tutorials at international conferences, and from my website, you can also find the full semester-long courses that I have taught at CMU and I'm currently teaching at MIT on this general theme of multimodal AI. So, to start, you want to think about a modality as a way in which some physical phenomena is expressed or perceived in the world. And oftentimes, we need to have some physical sensor to log and record this data and use it for computational processing on your computers. So you can think about a spectrum of more raw modalities closer to a sensor. For example, the speech signal that my computer microphone is picking up, or the image that's being taken from a camera, to more abstraction. These are processing to make it further away from the sensor by extracting more semantic meaning. So you can detect language or objects from these images, and you can then extract sentiment and object categories from from the language and detected objects as well. So more abstraction allows you to essentially get more processing. Now, multimodal therefore refers to problems with multiple modalities, and at its core, it becomes very difficult because it becomes the study of firstly heterogeneous and interconnected modalities. These are the key principles of what makes processing multiple modalities very difficult. And I'll cover these concepts in more detail, but at a high level, we have these three challenges of heterogeneity, the modalities being very different, connections, the fact that modalities often overlap in information, and interactions, the fact that modalities often combine to create more information. So what do each of these mean? Heterogeneity refers to the fact that if you have different data modalities, they often show different qualities, different structures, and different representations. And this can be thought of as a spectrum from more homogeneous, so much more similar, to heterogeneous, which are more different. So if you look at images on two different cameras, they're more homogeneous because they're both visual modalities, but they often have different information because they're from different camera angles. Text from two different languages, it becomes now more different, but they can still be translated to and from each other. Now, language and vision becomes much more different. There's inherently information in language that's not in images, and vice versa. And this can even go on to language and sensors. This is an even more different data modality. So that's the idea of heterogeneity. Another key idea is the fact that modalities, despite being very different, have some information that connects them. So we call this the shared information that relates modalities. And again, you can think of many problems as a spectrum from more shared to settings which are even unconnected. There is no information sharing, and both the modalities has pure unique information that's not in the other. But in general, if you have an example, for example, this image and a caption, you can see some connections between them, like the teacup, laptop, but there's also lots of unique information in the image, such as the presence of the sofa, the fact that the table is small, and the color of the sofa and the color of the table that is not present in the language. So this refers to the idea of connections between modalities. And finally, perhaps the most key principle is how the modalities interact. And by interact, I mean how they combine to provide more information for a task. So we started off with two modalities which have some connected information that is shared between them and some unique information. Interactions happen when you start introducing a task, perhaps a label Y that you're trying to predict. And there's several types of ways modalities can interact. One is this idea of redundancy, where you're trying to exploit what is shared between both modalities for the task. So you might have something like this person says, this movie is great, with a smile on their face. Both of these are very positive signals. They're shared between the modalities. And when you bring them together, you are actually very, very confident that this person very much enjoyed the movie. So that's the idea of redundancy. This is in contrast to unique information. So you're trying to exploit what is present in one and not in the other. For example, the person says something slightly positive with neutral expressions, and now it's about choosing which of the two modalities has the right unique information for the task. In this case, the first one. And perhaps the coolest case is when there is some synergy, which is this idea of emerging information that only arises when you bring the modalities together. So you might say something positive like wow, but with angry frustration on your face. And together it is the difference that indicates the person is actually being sarcastic about the task. So that's an example of synergy and the emergence of new information. So to recap what we have seen so far, multimodal is of course very important, but to be concrete, what is multimodal? This refers to problems in which data modalities come in, and there's three key principles, right? There's the heterogeneity. Different data modalities are different from each other, and that causes difficulty in processing. There's the idea of connections, that there is some common information between the two modalities that you're trying to exploit. And finally, the interaction. When you start bringing them together for some task Y, how does the information change and how does the information combine? So multimodal is the scientific study of heterogeneous and interconnected data. So now we'll cover why is multimodal difficult and what is next in multimodal AI. So multimodal AI brings about several challenges, and I'm going to use this general schematic to depict your modalities. So A, B, and C, different colors and shapes, and I'm going to draw it out as different elements, right? Often we have different elements inside a modality. So this could be words that a person is saying, a time step in a long-range sensor reading. It could be an object in a series of objects in the image or a video. And it's all about building these models, multimodal AI models that bring modalities together to learn representations or to make predictions. So there's 6 challenges that go into how this multimodal AI model should be designed. And these are challenges that you may have to consider for every problem. The first challenge is this idea of learning representations. So how do you take in different data modalities and learn representations that reflect the interactions between them? And this is a core building block for most multimodal problems, perhaps the first thing you have to consider. And schematically, what we are going to do is that given these data modalities with elements in a sequence, we're just going to focus on one individual element at a time. So it could be one word that a person is saying with one object region. It could be one time step of a sensor reading with one part of the image. We're going to care about the other elements later. So there are 3 general ways of learning representations, which we can roughly categorize as fusion, coordination, and fission. And these differ based on how many representations you learn given these two modality elements that you start with. So in fusion, you're really trying to bring things together. You're going to combine them into one representation, and the better that you combine it, the better you are. In coordination, you learn one representation for each element, separate representations, but you coordinate them using a similarity function. This makes it much easier to exploit the common information between them, such as going from one element to its representation and retrieving the nearest neighbor representation and therefore the nearest neighbor element. In fission, what you are doing is that you're taking elements and you're learning more representations than what you started with. This allows you to better disentangle and understand different parts of the information. So these are 3 different ways of learning representations. In the second challenge, as we mentioned, in representation, we just focus on one element at a time. Now, if you want to deal with all the elements, you have to tackle this challenge of alignment. So alignment basically refers to identifying and modeling the connections between all elements of multiple modalities. So again, 3 ways of learning alignment and 3 sub-challenges. One sub-challenge is the idea of discrete alignment, where your goal is to just find out which element in one modality is connected to another element in the other. For example, that one word relates to one part of the image, and this other word relates to this other part of the image. This problem is discrete when the modalities are segmented clearly into discrete elements. And we call it alignment because the goal is to just find out these ways of aligning. This challenge becomes harder in the continuous case. If you're looking at high frequency sensors or high resolution images, then it may not be so easily segmented into discrete elements. So we then call it continuous alignment. And finally, whereas the first 2, the goal is to just find out the alignment, this third challenge is what we call aligned representation, in which case you are trying to use alignment not as a final goal, but as an intermediate step to learn better representations. A lot of the recent work in transformers, especially multimodal transformers, fall into this category because the goal is to learn the alignment between multiple words and use that as context in order to learn better representations for your words and sentences. So we call it aligned representation. Challenge 3 is reasoning. So now that you have learned how to represent your data, now that you have captured the alignment between your different data modalities, now how do you combine all this information together to make predictions for a task? How do you essentially learn higher order and higher order information? So in the past, people would have done this using multiple layers of neural networks, each of them learning more representations and doing better alignment and sequentially learning more and more informative features for your task. But this is often not transparent and not controllable and not understandable by people. Nowadays, there is a great opportunity to have more explicit reasoning systems. These are reasoning systems that better combine this knowledge, usually through multiple inferential steps, and also exploiting the nature of the problem. So we've seen that these reasoning systems can be tree structured. So how do you combine and compose your information in a way that is more understandable by people? With the advent of these large language models and large multimodal models, we've also seen how this reasoning and decision-making process can literally be done using natural language over both language tasks and language and vision tasks and other multimodal tasks. So this reasoning and language makes it more interpretable and more controllable, and also makes models perform better. Of course, a lot of the reasoning is only possible if there is some external knowledge about the problem. It requires either expert prompting knowledge or expert verification knowledge if you're training these systems using RL, but some amount of external knowledge from experts about the problem to enable reasoning. So, whereas challenge 1, 2, and 3 were about making predictions for some label, challenge 4 is generation. In this challenge, it is about learning this generative process to produce and generate more raw modalities in a way that still respects their interactions and coherence with other ones. And there's several key ways of generation. There's problems which involve summarizing. This is important if you're taking lots of scientific documents and summarizing the most important parts. And you might want to summarize both the language into shorter descriptions and also maybe summarize the figures and tables into shorter descriptions, all while maintaining the joint meaning of the language and these visual and other modalities. So that's a summarization problem. Translation is also a very studied problem nowadays. How do you go from a language description to a generated image? So we call that translation. And finally, this idea of creation. How do you start from representations and generate even more data? And how do you do that while expanding information in a coherent way? Challenge 5 is transference. Transference refers to this problem of transferring knowledge between modalities, in which case usually one modality has lots of information. Modality B might have lots of information, such as a language model, such as internet scale data, such that lots of unlabeled data. And to help a target modality which you care about, in which you don't have that much data. So this could be things like medical images. This could be things like scientific documents. This could be things like real-world sensor data, all of which is very limited because of the difficulty of data acquisition. So now how to use modality B, which is much more resourceful, to help A, which you care about, but which you have less data. Several sub-challenges and ways of doing transference. There's, of course, great opportunity of using transfer learning from pre-trained models, both pre-trained models in the same modality, but also pre-trained models in a different modality, such as using large language models to help understand image and medical images. There are problems that can be solved with co-learning. Co-learning is the setting where you are introducing an extra modality as the input or as the output target, using that as training supervision, but then discarding it during inference. So your training is only provided, and the supervision is only provided during training. And finally, this idea of model induction, using multiple models or multiple agents that each perform different tasks, but also sharing information between them so that they help each other. Of course, big advent of this using these multi-agent large language models that each perform tasks separately, but synchronizing their outputs or sharing their outputs with each other. The sixth and final challenge is what we call quantification. So whereas the first 5 challenges were about building new models, developing new methods, challenge 6 is all about a deeper understanding. How do you create a better empirical and theoretical understanding of when modalities are different, how modalities interact, and how we should best model the learning process? So this is all about better study and better understanding of these models. So these are just some sub-challenges here. Understanding when modalities are different and how this influences learning, understanding how modalities interact, and understanding why sometimes multimodal modeling is so much more challenging than single modality models. So to summarize, multimodal models are unique because of these 6 core challenges. Right? You have this first core challenge of how to represent your data. Do you represent them as a fusion method? Do you learn separate but coordinated representations? Or do you factorize your representations into more than what you started with? Alignment is also a big challenge. If you look at multiple elements across different modalities, words, multiple sensing data, multiple images, multiple videos, how do you align which one is connected with which other one? And representation and alignment are typically the 2 biggest challenges that follows one from the other. Now that you've represented and learned the connections between different elements in your data, now how do you perform reasoning over it? How do you eventually learn more and more abstract representations that brings you closer and more relevant to the problem? Instead of using pure black box neural networks, today's models gives us an opportunity to reason in a more explicit way using tree structured, graph structured, and also nowadays using language as a way to explicitly reason over difficult problems. This, of course, can be used to predict your labels, but nowadays you can also use it to generate more data, whether it's summarizing larger, more context into the most salient features, translating from one to the other, or even generating more data as a way of doing synthetic data generation or simulations. Transference is another problem where you have a modality that you care about, but which you don't have that much data. How do you use more abundant and richer modalities to help you? And finally, all of this should be studied in the lens of quantification. How do you better understand the learning process? How do you better understand when things work and when things don't, to bring about a more principled understanding of these very modern, very powerful, but still very poorly understood models. So again, to summarize so far, we looked at the first two parts. We've seen what is multimodal. This class of very rich, very important problems involving heterogeneous data, but at the same time connected because of shared information and interacting for some task. We've seen, because of these unique characteristics, why is multimodal difficult? The fact that there's 6 challenges of representing, aligning, reasoning over your data, generating more data, transferring from high resource to low resource, and quantifying the whole learning process. These are the 6 challenges that makes multimodal difficult. And of course, this is just a brief overview. The survey paper that I mentioned at the beginning of the talk, which you can find on the website, covers each of these challenges in much more details, their sub-challenges, and more importantly, the types of methods that have been developed to tackle each sub-challenge as a starting point of building these models. And in the remaining time that I have left, about 20 minutes, I'll cover what is next, what I think are the most important next challenges in multimodal AI. So 3 general parts, we'll see how much we can cover. But of course, one big frontier for multimodal AI is the idea of multimodal foundation models and pre-training. How do you create very rich multimodal models beyond LLMs that directly understand multimodal data and therefore can be used for many applications? If it's too expensive to train and pre-train multimodal foundation models, there are also new approaches that take in trained LLMs, language-only models, and adapt them very quickly into multimodal LLMs. And finally, I'll cover some work in going beyond text generation to multimodal generation. Of course, some of this can be very useful for synthetic data generation, for simulating environments, and generating images, generating videos, and world models, and so on. So I'll play this quick video just as to motivate, what are the trends in multimodal learning. So here's a quick video.
It's just a privilege to watch your mind work.
So you can tell this is from the Big Bang Theory, and Sheldon is saying, it's just a privilege to watch your mind at work, clearly being sarcastic to his friend. And if you think about this new generation of multimodal models, what you want them to understand, of course, you want them to be able to watch the video, right? Watch the video, understand the video, and you might give it some questions, such as classification questions. What is the tone of the man in the gray shirt? Open-ended questions like describing the relationship between these two people. Explanation-based questions, such as explaining why the model made this decision while citing visual and verbal evidence. So now it's starting to have a flavor of generation because you have to explain in language, but you also have to explain by citing and retrieving visual or verbal evidence. Generation, use this as a starting video clip to generate an entire story. Now this becomes an even more difficult generative task because you have to generate the conversations and the video and the audio and the facial expressions and the body language. And finally, counterfactual tasks, simulating everything if this was a different society or culture. Now, of course, I'm just using an example of this human behavior analysis that our group does a lot, but you could think of this as any other scientific task, right? You could have videos of physical phenomena. You're trying to use LLMs to understand and explain and generate equations and laws that govern this video or physical phenomena. It could be even scientific figures, scientific documents, and you're trying to explain and make sense of it for scientific discovery, explaining the phenomena, explaining and generating figures and tables, and even running autonomous experiments for it. So essentially, you're going to have this flavor of multimodal input, multimodal output tasks. And so how can we achieve it? The first part is, of course, models that can understand and synthesize multimodal data into multimodal representations. So this is a fusion problem. Nowadays, it's also about learning the alignment between your data modalities to learn better representations. You also have to adapt these large language models that doesn't just take in text and generate text, but can take in multimodal representations and use that as a condition to generate text. So the text generated actually looks at and understands the multimodal representation. And finally, part 3 is about not just generating text, but also generating other modalities. And if you think about this schematic, this is essentially how humans operate. We take in lots of multimodal data from our environments using our 5 senses. We learn compact representations in our head that combines these representations from multiple data modalities as input, and we interact with the world through different data modalities, right? We speak, we gesture, we think, we talk to people, we draw, we output multiple modalities. So that is, of course, where AI and perhaps if you were AGI is going. So how do you enable these? Several key innovations that have enabled this. This first idea of is this idea of multimodal transformers, which we developed. This is a way of learning aligned representations of different data modalities and combining them. So at a high level, you can have different data modalities like language, which could have a sequence length of 3, so 3 words by your word embedding dimension. And you might have other data modalities like nonverbal expressions. This could be, in this case, is transposed. It would have a dimension of your nonverbal embeddings by some other sequence length. In this case, the sequence length could be 4. Now, the key idea of all of these multimodal transformers is to learn the alignment between your 3 words that a person is saying and your 4 nonverbal expressions. Now, this alignment can be seen as a 3x4 matrix, right? A 3x4 weighted outer product that tells you how each of the 3 words aligns with each of your 4 nonverbal expressions. We can also think about that as your attention matrix, or in this case, a multimodal attention from vision to language. Now, this matrix can be normalized in different ways. You can normalize it by square root of d so that the magnitudes don't increase as d increases. And also row normalizing it with a softmax so that each of these entries in the vision to language attention matrix are non-negative and sums to 1. So you can interpret this as essentially the word privilege align 0.7 with your vocal emphasis, your loud voice, and 0.3 with eye rolling. And when the person is speaking the word mind, it's emphasis of 0.1, alignment of 0.1 with your vocal emphasis, 1.0 with your vocal emphasis. Now, this vision to language attention matrix can then be used to actually take a new representation with your nonverbal expressions. So that's a multiplication by this 4 by d representation of your nonverbal expressions. And of course, what this allows you to do is learn this weighted average, where you have a new representation for the word privilege that a person is saying. It seems positive in nature, but it has been contextualized by taking 0.7 with the vocal emphasis representation plus 0.3 with the eye rolling expression. And that gives you a new contextualization of the word privilege with the actual vocal emphasis and eye rolling behaviors that a person is making. So it's a new language representation contextualized with vision. And that allows you to infer that a person is actually being sarcastic about the task. So again, several key ideas here. This is an example of a line representation. You're learning the alignment between your 3 words and your 4 nonverbal expressions. So it's a 3x4 alignment or attention matrix. Once you've learned this alignment, you're using that to learn a better representation, a new representation of language that has been contextualized with vision using this alignment. Now, these are virtually used in almost all multimodal pre-trained models. You have sequences of images, sequences of text. You do both these code transformers, so that we just seen, vision to language attention and language to vision attention, followed by perhaps more transformer layers, and until you learn good representations. And again, you can see that this alignment is learned by these models. You can train these models and you can train it on these images and captions. And if you look at the attention given a particular word, so given flowers, which parts of the image that it aligns with, it does align with the flowers in the image. If you look at the word cloudy and look at the alignment to the parts of the image, you does see that it highlights the clouds in the sky. And likewise for the rug, for the chair, for the painting, for the plant. So very intuitive that it learns the alignments between your two data modalities and it uses that to learn better representations. Nowadays, people have also extended this for continuous modalities. So that was a discrete case where words were easily segmented into sentences were segmented into discrete words, and images were segmented into these squares, these little image squares, image patches. This can be harder when your modalities are more continuous. For example, speech. For example, high-frequency sensors. For example, long-range videos. Now, in this case, it becomes harder because you have to segment your continuous data into discrete elements so that they can be processed and predicted by these transformer models. So there's, of course, methods that are based on taking your continuous data, learning feature embeddings, and applying clustering. And once you apply clustering, you're essentially quantizing your continuous data into a subset of a set of clusters. This can be done using clustering. People also do it using VQ, VAE. These are called vector quantized variational autoencoders. They're also used in a lot of these video and image generative models today. But once you essentially done the k-means clustering, you're reducing continuous data into maybe 3 key clusters, which can be used to be predicted using your masked transformers, right? It reduces this regression problem of regressing your continuous data into just predicting a classification over 3 classes. So now, since we've developed these multimodal transformers, back in 2018, 2019, we've realized that these transformers can be used for many things, right? They obviously started with being used for text, and then we have vision transformer. We developed multimodal transformers, and we've also applied transformers to things like time series data, tabular data, set-based data, and so on. So this led us to ask, could it be even possible that these transformers and these sequence models could be a unified encoder for anything? So we did this in about 2022, and we had some follow-up works continuing it, and we still do some of this work today. But essentially, you can think of the whole world as a partially observed multimodal problem, right? Sometimes we see language and vision when talking to people. Sometimes we see image and text when browsing the internet. Sometimes the robots see the image and force sensors, proprioception sensors when interacting with the world. And sometimes you see other forms of medical sensors and medical images when looking at healthcare problems. In fact, all of the world is just a different subset of modalities for different problems. So you can try to build a model that essentially unifies a lot of these different data modalities using the very similar models. So a recipe for this was to first treat most of these data modalities as a standardized input sequence. And a lot of these inputs are just series, right? A series of words, a series of speech signals, a series of image pixels, a series of force sensor readings or other medical sensor readings. You can apply a modality-specific embedding that identifies which modality it is. So language is here, and language is here, and sensor is here, and sensor is here. You can apply unimodal transformers. All this is doing our self-attention within the same data modality. The key here is that it is shared, so it's the same set of parameters, and a shared multimodal transformer. So this would be your cross-attention from alignment from one modality to another, and different task-specific classifiers trained with multitask training to predict different tasks. So this essentially gives you a recipe of essentially applying one model that can tackle everything. And in fact, this works, right? This is a paper that we showed that this works. And you can essentially design a same model architecture with the same parameters for many different data modalities. So we can understand these videos.
It's just a privilege to watch your mind work.
It can do tasks involving multimedia like image and text data. Some of these involve figurative and even humorous language and captioning tasks. We applied it to physical sensing. These are IMU data, tactile sensing data. These are just time series data in the physical world. You can apply it to robotics, which again, physical problems that involve imaging, time series, sensor readings. And this one exact model is able to process all of them and achieve pretty competitive, almost state-of-the-art performance for all of these tasks at the same time. So that was all about learning richer multimodal representations using these transformer-like models and also extensions of these transformers to more both discrete and continuous and settings with many modalities. Now we'll also briefly touch upon how to adapt large language models to multimodal. This is another way of thinking about it. If you look at many problems, you have these frozen pre-trained large language models. It's very hard to continue fine-tuning them and training them again because they require lots of resources. How can you keep them frozen while still adapting it to look at multimodal data? So this can be done using a popular set of models, which are called adapter-based models. What they essentially do is that you take in a new modality, let's say an image, you learn the features, for example, through a CNN or a vision transformer, and you define these small adapter layers, which can be as small as linear transformations. Linear transformations from these visual representation space into the large language model input token embedding space. These can just be a linear transformation. This allows you to then take the adapted representation with the pre-trained text token features and use that to predict what you're trying to predict. In this case, you're trying to caption the image. So once you've done that, you can then give it a new image, pass it through the adapter, which goes and adapts this image representation into your language model input space and ask another question, like what color is the car? And it can answer blue. So this is basically zero-shot image classification. You can then give it problems that involve maybe one shot. So you first give it an image, you ask it a question, who invented this, and give the answer the Wright brothers. You use this as a one example, and then using the second example, you give it the image, ask a question, who invented this, while blanking out the answer. And this model is able to learn from one example and answer the next one correctly, Steve Jobs. And finally, you can even apply this to more settings. You can do what we call this variable binding problem. We give it an apple. You tell the model this is a DAX. You give it an orange. You tell the model this is a Blicket. DAX and Blicket are obviously made up words. And give it a new apple. The question is, what is this? So by learning from the first example and the second example, the model is able to answer correctly that this is a DAX by binding this new vocabulary with the image. So this is a very general purpose solution, adapting these large language models, which have been pre-trained and frozen because you don't want to continue training them while still enabling them to understand multimodal data. So this is actually a base for how a lot of these large multimodal models in industry are probably trained today by taking the best LLMs and adapting them with other image information. And these are also a basis of how some of these popular open source frameworks like Mini-GPT-4 are performed. So again, you have these large frozen language models like Vicuna, frozen. You have these image models, which are really good, also frozen. So QFormer, Vision Transformer. And now you have an image that comes in. It passes through the frozen image encoder. It goes through a trainable linear layer. So this is linear layer is the only thing that is being trained by the model, which is very cheap. This is just like a big matrix. You could then give it a task. What do you think of this design? You give it some instructions of what the model should answer, and you're essentially training the model to predict these instructions given and updating a linear layer to train that. And usually these are trained in two stages, right? First, you just align it. So you give it images and the captions of the image. So that just using to describe the image. But describing the image is not all that is for these models. You also want to actually provide useful context. For example, helping people understand what's in the image, helping people improve the image, and so on. So that's called instruction tuning, right? How do you actually give it good instructions of what images should be, what people tend to ask, and what are good, desirable completions that people complete. Llama adapter is also a very good resource. This extends it to beyond text and just image to even things like text and point cloud, and it can also generate images and also do it in different languages. And all of this, as the name suggests, starts with Llama. Llama is the open source large language model from Facebook, and then adapter. So it's basically adapting lots of different modalities into the input, right? You can adapt 3D information, image information, different languages. All it requires is just data and this small adapter layer that updates this large language model. Okay, in this last part, so now we've seen lots of multimodal data. You learn multimodal representations. That's using transformers and these other sequence models. You can use it to adapt large language models. So the large language model doesn't just look at the text, it also looks at and understands these multimodal representations. And finally, also settings, I'm going to cover how do you get these models to also generate more data. Now this, of course, ties into these text-to-image generation models. Right? Now that you can generate images, you can also generate, for example, now that you can generate text, you can also generate images of this text. So this is a translation-based model. And I'll skip over some of these details because we're kind of out of time. But essentially, you have these models which are called CLIP. CLIP-like models are essentially a way of scoring the similarity between language and images. And this falls broadly into this class of models that I discussed. These are representation-based models. But if you recall, when I discussed representation, there are three types, right? There's a way of fusing two data into one representation. There's coordination, which for two elements, you keep two representations, but coordinate them with a similarity function. And that is what this CLIP is doing, right? You have a language embedding, you have a visual embedding, and you measure some similarity between them, which is informed by positive pairs and negative pairs. Right? So positive image and the caption that describes the image, it should be maximize the similarity so they become more similar. And an image with an incorrect caption, a random caption, should be pushed together further apart. So you want the representations to be more different from each other. So you have this popular contrastive loss, negative loss. So you're basically maximizing a positive, maximizing the similarity of positive pairs, and minimizing the similarity of these negative pairs, of which there's much more. There's usually one positive pair and n-1 negative pairs. And these cosine functions, these similarity functions can be things like cosine similarity. So now that you've trained CLIP, it becomes very easy to use CLIP to allow both text generation and image generation. So you might have these models that take in, for example, images and captions, like how you would just, read a book, right? You see some images, you describe the captions and so on. And once this model inputs all this information, it would generate a completion of the story. But now it's only text. You can also use the generated description of the story and use CLIP, this info NCE loss, to retrieve an image that most well describes the generated text. So this allows you to do lots of cool things, right? You can start discussing and talking to this AI model. And at some point when you say, show me an illustration of this animal, a beaver, it generates the image of the beaver. You can ask, what about a pencil drawing of this beaver? And it can retrieve a pencil drawing of it, right? You can start giving it a house that you think is really cool. This is a house with a unique design. You can then ask to show me more houses like this. And then the model could retrieve similar images designed by that same architect in a similar style. And there's a cooking example, right? You're cooking and you want to beat the eggs into a egg white should be stiff and glossy. You can ask, show me a picture of what that looks like. And a model uses CLIP to retrieve an image of what the egg white should look like when you beat it to be stiff. So this allows you to essentially start doing multimodal input, but also multimodal output. The model is able to both generate text and images. Of course, as we know, CLIP is not the only way of generating models. So you could have the model take an image and text, the adapter of image, the text to the tokenizer, you get the model that generates the output text. And now you can have these models both decide whether to retrieve or to generate. If you're retrieving, then it's using clip. It's using the generated text to retrieve the image. If it's generation, you can basically put it through Stable Diffusion. Stable Diffusion and these all the other text-to-image models taking a text and generates it, right? When I say generation, it's actually generating it pixel by pixel using diffusion models, right? So that's the difference. The text could be converted to images using retrieval of the image or pure generation of the image. And this also gives you really cool things, right? You could start talking about, cooking. You show an empty bowl of noodles. It can generate images and suggestions of how to make it more healthy with vegetables and stuff. Deciding what tattoo to get, trying to design a cake, and customizing it by generating and retrieving different designs for it. Okay, we are basically out of time, but again, I want to summarize what we've looked at. This is a broad introduction to both our research and also the broader research community on multimodal AI, which is, of course, a big research endeavor, but also critical, absolutely critical for understanding people, understanding the physical world, understanding scientific discovery and knowledge. It's all about taking in different data modalities, integrating and learning powerful representations for them. We covered what is multimodal, this unique set of challenges that involve heterogeneous, so data is very different from each other. They're connected because they share some overlap in information, and they interact. There's some fusion of information to bring about new knowledge. It is very difficult to tackle multimodal problems, and we covered 6 key challenges of how to better represent and align your data, how do you do reasoning in a transparent way, generating more data, transferring from high resource to low resource modalities, and quantifying the learning process. And finally, we covered some brief ideas of what is next, right? These multimodal large language models, these LLMs are going to be more and more multimodal in nature. Generative AI models are going to take in multimodal data and generate multimodal data. And of course, big applications in understanding the physical world, the scientific world, the healthcare of people and health and well-being, and also agents that can autonomously do online tasks, do scientific discovery, do real-world autonomous tasks for us. Great. So happy to take questions in the next final 5 minutes.
Good. Thank you, Paul, for the excellent talk. Yeah, I really appreciate you put systematically what are the challenges and what are potential solutions by building on the language models and so on. So, so if you have a question, you can put into the Q&A. I see 2 of them already. So Paul, let me repeat it to make sure everyone can hear it. So first question is about, so when humans give feedback on an answer, they can also give feedback on a work process to get that answer. So in an AI system, which might go through a reasoning process that could be correct, but may not be intuitive or make sense to a human. So is there a way to sort of validate such a reasoning model, I guess, how human can understand and validate this type of a reasoning model?
Yeah, great question. And of course, this is probably the hottest topic in AI nowadays, which is LLM reasoning. And for our group, we're also doing a lot of work in multimodal LLM reasoning, multimodal reasoning. There are several things to think about, like when you train these models. One way is called SFT, which is that you get a human to write how they reason. So you have a math problem, for example, you get the human to annotate how they solve the math problem, the equations that they write, the images and diagrams that they draw, and the final answer. So you actually use the intermediate process as supervision to train the model to reason. And then the other way is called reinforcement learning, right? Reinforcement learning doesn't require these human annotated steps and just give it a final answer, but you need a reward. You need to say how close this answer is to the final answer, how close this other answer is to the final answer. So that would be trained using reinforcement learning. And most models, of course, depending on how much data, how easy it is to get the human detailed reasoning process, it's usually trained using a combination of supervised fine-tuning and reinforcement learning. And of course, it's important to verify, you can have the model have very good reasoning, but wrong answers. Or it can be lucky in getting the right answer, but have terrible reasoning. And depending on what it is, there are ways of, either improving the reasoning process using better SFT and human annotations, or improving the answer using better RL methods. But I think this is still, lots of work currently on this. We have a lot of papers on multimodal reasoning nowadays that looks at both, for example, yes, the quality of the reasoning and the quality of the answer.
Thank you, Paul. So another question is about the potential use of this type of a powerful multimodal AI for surveillance. So what ethical considerations do you think should be put forward or encouraged if we anticipate this type of technique become widely available?
Yeah. I mean, this is of course a concern. Nowadays we already feel models are invading some notion of our privacy by looking at our text, right? By what we're typing into ChatGPT or what we're typing on social media. In the future, it is really going to be much more embedded, right? These AI systems will be much more ubiquitous. It'll be much more wearable. People could be wearing things, like ChatGPT could be in your brain, so you don't even have to type to it. You think, and then it responds. I'm not a legal or regulatory researcher. I think there are going to be lots of challenges, some of which will be, models have to run on the edge. They should not be sent to a cloud. They should not be sent to big corporations. Running on the edge is definitely going to be a way of dealing with it. How to get the power requirements for it to run on the edge, new novel, energy sources, maybe even harvesting human body energy sources, right? Eventually if you look at ChatGPT, it might be in the brain, it might be on your watch, it might be on your phone. It's going to be closer to you, but it should also be running on you so that none of your data is going out. And of course, a lot of these things the things that we do, we have strict compliance, strict ethical review boards checking our work on the health and permissions, and checking our work on the smell sensing and giving the right permissions. And that's something that, of course, has to be done. Yeah.
Thank you, Paul. Another question comes from my student, Xiang Rui. So he's asking about the time series. So can multimodal model learn quantitative information such as the growth stage of the apple when we provide images paired with some textual time stamps? So in other words, can model go beyond categories, apple versus pear classifications, and capture a continuous or ordered representation of the object?
Of course. I mean, that's what I was trying to show in this slide here, which is that, it used to be the case that you had to train all the AI models were classification models, right? You classify A versus B, apple versus pear, happy versus not happy. But then all the, the potential of these LLMs nowadays is that you could take multimodal data in, and you could have the LLM as the output and basically ask it anything. You could ask it to classify. You could ask it open-ended questions. You could ask it to explain. You could ask it to generate, and even ask counterfactual questions. Of course, this gets harder, right? That's why we cover these three parts, where first part is about learning multimodal representations. And these representations could be used to classify. But then now, can you take the representation and feed it into an LLM so that now the LLM can enable you to ask and answer any question, right? While also understanding the multimodal representation. I mean, of course, this temporal part also makes it a bigger challenge. Our group does a lot of work in some of these multimodal models that understand like long videos, long time series data, long sensing data. But this also comes with inherent difficulties. Yeah, but this is getting across possible.
Thank you. So one question I have, Paul, is so I guess one of the challenges, unique challenge of multimodal compared to the general single model AI is alignment. So particularly in science, often we don't really have much data that have a full modality. You always have some missing modality data for particular, let's say, experiments. So how the alignment, I think you mentioned some of the solutions, and how do we tackle those challenges in science, this type of missing modality problems?
Yeah, there's several ways of doing that. So one way is to do things like optimal transport, which basically means that if you know what the pairing is, you can learn the alignment, right? If you don't know what the pairing is, you can jointly optimize over potential pairings, and for each pairing, some alignment objective, and you iterate. So that's one popular way of doing it. There's also ways of doing this idea of translation, where you try to use A. If A and B are your modalities, you use A to predict B, and what you predicted in B to re-predict A. So this idea of like cycle consistency, all of which are referred to in the survey paper, and like covers recent methods. Nowadays, a lot of these missing modalities, it's becoming less and less of a problem, because if you look at these adapter-based models that I showed over here, you just have a pre-trained model and you adapt it with a different data modality. You can actually get by learning the alignment with very limited data. Like this was like zero shot. You can like one shot. This is one example of this, and this is just like this one is two examples. You give it two examples of the image and text, you can already start answering something. So in the past, training things from scratch, you probably need a lot of paired data. But nowadays, you have really powerful LLMs for language. We have very powerful vision encoders, and we're starting to see very powerful, encoders for like even things like scientific documents and graphs and scientific images. It's possible to get by the alignment using much less paired data, or even like coarser grained paired data. You might not have paired data at the level of one figure and a caption, but you have the data at the entire paper, right? Entire paper of images and captions. So even the paired data may not need to be in the same resolution, and it can still learn. Yeah, like this example that was showing, this example where the model ended up learning the alignment. So how was this model trained? It was trained with the entire image pairing with the entire caption, right? You can get this from Instagram or Wikipedia. But what it ends up learning is that it learned the alignment between individual word flowers and the individual region of the image, right? So it had a much coarser grained entire image with entire caption, but I learned the alignment between one individual word and one individual image region. So that this is also possible.
So Paul, we are running out of time already. So I want to ask maybe this final thought. So what do you think of future human AI collaboration for science? So what's the role of human in that scenario?
I mean, human will be extremely important. I mean, right now, first of all, we'll program the AIs that we have the desirable traits that can help us in the human AI collaboration, right? And I think right now it may not be so much as designing the AI models itself, like architecture-wise, but curating the data, curating the environment, defining the positive reward functions in the models that we see. Those are kind of the key research questions, and less so about tinkering with architectures or training objectives, because those are pretty much standardized, especially for these large language models. For our group, again, as you see, we're very interested in, especially for science, these models are not just going to be able to read text, right? Reading text is insufficient. They have to be grounded in physical environment, or and this grounding really requires at least in what I think a few more years of research on building these core architectures themselves, right? So yeah, lots of opportunities.
Yeah, we do get a new question coming from the chat. So the Qin Wu, so he's asking about in order for new type of sensor or scientific data to interact with LLM, so do you need to first set up a standard so people will describe the data consistently?
That's a great question. That's a very, very good question. Because yeah, we're going through this language bottleneck with LLMs. So we're trying to get the mapping between other data and language. I think you need to get mappings between these other data and language, but I don't think it has to be one standard, because as you've seen in image captioning, if you have an image and you want people to caption the image, the more variety that people caption, the more information that different people give, it actually allows you to train better models, right? Same thing with these LLMs when people do this RLHF. The more people give feedback on the LLM completion and from diverse feedback, the better these models get. So I don't think there's ever going to be a one-to-one mapping between like any sensor or language, but we need some set of standards. It could be a mix of human. For a lot of the work that we do on using LLM to process sensor, the language is actually signal processing language, right? That the wave, the frequency, the amplitude, the Fourier transform, these are kind of some standards of languages, right? It might not be how humans describe it, but these are formal languages. It could even be code. A lot of people think, and we have a paper that we're going to put out soon to understand these like scientific figures and charts and diagrams and reason over them. That's a big problem in AI for science. Code is actually a much better medium than natural language. So yeah, there's many opportunities for different types of languages.
Yeah, really exciting. So I think there is no better way to end this session. So thank you again, Paul, for the excellent talk. We learned a lot. I really appreciate your time. I also want to thank everyone joining this session. Hope to see you in next time.